Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So, taking another fun and exciting episode for you guys this Friday because recently I acquired a Taito Wolf PCB that's running Psychic Force 2012, the only game this board ever ran. This is one of the strangest arcade PCBs I've ever managed to get into my collection, and it did arrive broken, but thankfully I was able to repair it. I did that off camera because it was an absolute chore and a half. But if you know anything about me and my channel, I love rare and esoteric arcade hardware, and especially ones that only have one game running on the entire platform. The good thing is, at least in my opinion, Psychic Force 2012 is an absolutely fun, intriguing, and strange beat-em-up fighting game that also feels a little bit like a shmup all at the same time. It's kind of hard to categorize what genre this actually is, but it's a ton of fun, especially as a two-player game, so if a board is going to run one game and one game only, I'm glad it's at least a game that is worth playing, and this definitely came out on the Dreamcast, so it is quite easy to play, but you know me, I love weird hardware, and the Taito Wolf arcade PCB makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Taito could have designed this thing any number of ways that would have been easier to manage and easier to maintain, but they just absolutely decided to do this thing in the most ass-backwards way possible, and I love them for that. Taking a look at the top of the board, this is the actual game in and of itself. This is Psychic Force 2012, so it seems like Taito developed this board to have more than one game run on it because you can plug in the game on the top and you'll see all of these chips right here, all of the graphics ROMs as well as the program ROMs. And on these two stickers, this is a Psychic Force 2012 board, and again, that's because this is the only game that ever came out on it. It's interesting when arcade developers make new hardware and then end up releasing just one game. This happened a lot in the mid to late 90s when it came to 3D hardware. The 3D space was moving so quickly, your board could be out of date basically 4 months after you release it. Now, taking another look at the top board, you're going to see a couple of flash ROM chips here, as well as all of those different ROM chips, and one socketed gal as well as a little sticker. I have no idea why that's there, but it's just part of the board story. And you'll see here it's the Taito W ROM PCB, made in Japan. So obviously this was always intended on having more than one game work for it, or else they wouldn't develop an entire ROM board just to socket into the middle board, which is one of the more intriguing things on the board, but you're going to have to wait a moment to get to that. But this, again, is just such a strange setup. You have three different boards, including a computer motherboard on the bottom, but it all ends up terminating out in a JAMA connection. By this point in time, JVS was way more common, or people were just using PCs and arcade cabinets, but this is just going to be straight up standard JAMA. It'll run on pretty much any arcade cabinet and any monitor out there. It does run in 240p versus 480p, so even though this is something that looks like it could run in VGA resolution, you're not going to get that. You also have an absolutely massive sound amplifier as well as a barrel jack in, because you could give this additional power if your power supply on the JAMA Edge isn't powerful enough. But the nice thing about it being full JAMA is the controls are extremely easy to wire up. If you have any sort of Super Gun or arcade cabinet, you'll be able to play this game with no kick harnesses whatsoever because it only uses a 3-button setup. That means it's going to be easy for beginning arcade collectors to actually play. If you can actually find a board for this game, I would say they're like 9.5 out of 10, exceedingly rare. And you will see here on the bottom, this is just a bog standard computer motherboard. You're going to have that keyboard in as well as a DB9 port and another port to the side. It's really funny how Taito actually made this thing, because if you take a look around to the side, you're going to see a socket 7 right here with a small metal heatsink on the top, and if we actually take that socket off, we can see what is underneath it. This is this hybrid generation of arcade hardware that's both an arcade board that's custom designed as well as a PC in and of itself, because this is just an Intel Pentium running at 200 megahertz. So as far as all of the code execution is concerned, it's just on a bone stock Intel CPU of the era, which is always really interesting. The nice thing is I did replace the thermal pad here, and I will install a fan on this sometime in the future as well. But if we take a look over here, you're going to have so many different headers that are not used whatsoever. It kind of begs the question, why did Taito develop an entire JAMA mid PCB and then have a ROM board on top when they just could have popped a hard drive into this thing, probably saved money and actually had a better experience? And it only uses one of the 2 RAM stick slots, so this could have been expanded further with more RAM. It seems like the Taito Wolf PCB was developed for expandability, but then they just abandoned it after one game. But otherwise, this is just a a computer motherboard, really nothing interesting to look at. This was used in a ton of different PCs back in the day. It's like a mid-tier PCB just to run your computer. So again, to put a ROM board on the top versus just having plug-and-play hard drives is one of the most over-engineered things I've ever seen, and that's kind of why I love the board. I love over-engineering in the arcade space. And you even power the computer motherboard over the JAMA Edge. It will take all of the different voltages, 5 volts, 12 volts, ground, and move them down into the computer motherboard as well. So this is not being supplied sort of any power from an ATX power supply. It's all coming in through the JAMA Edge. This is a very intriguing and interesting and weird way to do it in and of itself. But the real fun is in the midboard. I'm not taking it off this PCB. The reason I had to repair this and it took so long was because the riser card that connects the midboard to the motherboard was giving me absolute hell. It took me so much cleaning, so much pin realignment, and a fiber brush to try to scrape off a little bit of oxidation to be able to actually get this game to boot. So we're just going to go down to the mid layer on this one. So we'll pop the actual game off in and of itself, and this is how you could change games if there was more than one. And we'll take a look at what's inside this stack, because this is an entire Voodoo 1 GPU. You've got the 2 chips here that make up the 3DFX Voodoo. You have all of the RAM on board, as well as a custom chip there from Taito in the middle with this sticker over it. You also have the full sound section, which we'll get into in just a moment. But Taito basically made their own 3DFX card as well as a sound card with these custom chips socketed here just to run this one game, when they could have just basically put a graphics card into this slot right here. There is a riser card that connects this mid-JAMA board to the computer motherboard, and this thing is an absolute mess. It needs perfect alignment. It can be torqued very easily. This is why the board came in as not working. All it would do is give me some error beeps on the postcode for a DOS PC, because this is running a flavor of DOS, no Windows whatsoever, and it took me probably a good half a day to actually get this thing working on my setup, but I'm so glad that I did. It's another exceedingly rare arcade board that was basically thought to be not working, but luckily it wasn't anything too involved. It was just a lot of cleaning, a lot of aligning, a lot of checking continuity on pins from one board to the other, and that got us a fully playable Psychic Force 2012 that will now live in my collection. When people come over for game nights, I'll break it out and we'll play this and give it a good time. So I'm so glad that I was able to actually repair this board, and it was working. It just needed a lot of love. And if you take a look at the other side of this board over here, there are a lot of customs on this board. I'm not sure if they've ever been dumped. I'll have to check the different MAME dumps and see what's going on. But this had a ton going on for it. I think a lot of it could have just been done as a computer in and of itself. And you'll see here the Zoom sound chips as well. That's what's driving all the sound for this board. So go ahead and listen to the game, hear what it sounds like on these chips, and I'll be right back with more. Sounds good to me, but you let me know what you think down below. But again, it's just so weird to see a full JAMA card that is a 3DFX card, which is also a sound card, which also controls all of the inputs, and we have those custom chips there as well that are going to control the rest of the game. And we have an absolutely beefy sound amplifier to go along with that. That is just for heat dissipation, and thankfully all of the capacitors on this board seem to be totally fine. I think I'll leave them as is and maybe deal with them in the future. But so many items on this are socketed that I would never expect to be socketed before. Like this resistor chain here, where you're coming in on that DC barrel jack. Seeing those socketed is a very interesting thing, and I can't think of another arcade board that does it. But this in and of itself is such a weird board for 1998, but it kind of makes sense that Taito was probably trying to get something out the door quickly, because pretty much everyone was eating their lunch when it came to in-house 3D. This is Operation Tiger. It's one of the rarest games that Taito ever made, and this is off original hardware that I captured on my channel last year. This is what they had in-house for 3D in 1998, and while it is a fun game, it is absolutely janky and ugly in comparison to anything that Konami Konami or Namco or especially Sega was doing back then. So it makes total sense that Taito realized they needed to have better 3D in arcades and they needed it quickly, and they hadn't gotten to the Type 0 board yet, not the computer board, but the actual bespoke hardware board. So what they did was they took a motherboard from a computer, they developed their own graphics card and sound card that ran on JAMA and put a ROM board on top so they could get 3D in 1998 that was getting close to rivaling what the other arcade manufacturers could do without having to design an entirely new system. And because Intel architecture was so easy to develop for, it was probably a very quick pivot for Taito to get a game working on the board and out into arcades. So that's how you have the hodgepodge of hardware that ends up being the Taito Wolf board. It's one of the strangest arcade boards I've ever seen. It is now one in my collection, and it's one that went from not working to working. It'll definitely have a special place on my arcade shelf for people to play when they come over. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Tell me what you think of Psychic Force 2012. I'm sure 99% of you have played it on Dreamcast versus arcades, because it's hard to say if Psychic Force 2012 even came out in arcades in the US. It's kind of hard to pin down whether or not that happened. But it's one more exceedingly rare arcade board in my collection working, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.